The chamber was vast, built to dwarf any individual who dared stand within it, yet the old veteran did not flinch. His body bore the evidence of wars long past, scars carved across mottled skin, one eye clouded, movements stiff with old wounds that never healed. He had seen too much to be shaken by grandeur or intimidation. The counselors stared down from their gilded perches, shimmering robes draped across their forms, their voices dripping with the pride of an empire that believed itself eternal. They had summoned him as a courtesy, not because they expected to learn anything useful. To them, he was a relic, a half-forgotten survivor from some skirmish on the fringes of the galaxy. When he began to speak, his voice carried the weight of memory, low and steady, as though each word cost him something. He told them of a world hidden in an insignificant spiral arm, a blue and green sphere the Empire had catalogued but dismissed. Its people had no starships, no advanced weapons, nothing that should have mattered to galactic powers. Yet when his unit clashed with them, he discovered something no report could capture. He described how their soldiers fought with a kind of fury that made the ground itself seem to burn beneath their steps. They did not break when outnumbered, nor surrender when cornered. They adapted in real time, turning every disadvantage into a weapon. He remembered comrades cut down by strategies improvised on the spot, tactics that no simulation had ever predicted. He paused often, letting the silence press against the ornate walls, hoping it would force the counselors to feel the weight of what he had endured. He spoke of nights haunted by the sight of human eyes in the dark, unyielding, relentless. He told of their refusal to die quietly, of wounded men and women rising from the dirt to keep fighting even when victory was mathematically impossible. He recalled the confusion among his command as humans dismantled traps they had never seen before, rebuilt weapons not meant for them, and used the very terrain against his forces as if it had been designed for war. The council's reaction was predictable. A few chuckled, exchanging knowing glances as if humoring a delusional elder. Others scoffed openly, calling his words embellishment born of trauma. One accused him of mistaking savagery for strategy, claiming humans were nothing more than desperate animals clinging to survival. The Empire had faced countless species and crushed them all. Why should this primitive backwater be any different? Their arrogance filled the chamber as heavily as the incense curling from golden braziers. Still, the veteran pressed on. He described how his unit, trained and equipped with the best Imperial weaponry, had been shredded by an enemy who should have been beneath notice. He painted the memory of comrades begging for reinforcements that never came, their screams drowned beneath human gunfire and improvised explosives. He recounted duels where human soldiers fought hand-to-hand with a ferocity that ignored fear of death. They laughed in the face of odds, mocked danger, and spat defiance even as they bled out. He admitted he had fled, not out of cowardice, but because survival was the only way to carry the warning home. The chamber was cold despite its opulence, but his words carried heat. He begged them not to underestimate Earth. He swore that if the Empire forced those people into its wars, they would not remain obedient soldiers. They would learn, adapt, and one day surpass their masters. He told them that humans carried within them a paradox, the will to destroy and the capacity to endure, fused in a way he had never witnessed in any other species. He could still see their faces in his sleep, not with terror but with a grim kind of respect, because he knew he had looked upon something that could not be extinguished. When he finished, silence stretched for a long moment, broken only by the soft rustle of ceremonial garments. Then came the laughter, dismissive and sharp. They labeled his testimony a ghost story, the ramblings of a mind scarred beyond repair. They reassured themselves that the Empire's dominion was absolute, and that no primitive world could ever threaten it. He was dismissed with polite words that stung worse than open insult. As he turned to leave, leaning heavily on his staff, his single clear eye lingered on the assembly one last time. He had given them the truth, raw and unvarnished, and they had chosen blindness. Deep inside, he carried the certainty that their arrogance would cost them dearly. For he had looked into the heart of humanity, and he knew what the Council refused to admit. These so-called primitives were born for war, and one day the stars themselves would tremble at their march. When the summons reached Earth, it was delivered not as a request but as a proclamation. The Empire did not negotiate, it announced. They declared that humanity had been granted the honor of serving in the legions, as though the call to arms was a privilege, not an act of domination. For many humans, the meaning was clear. They were not being invited, they were being conscripted. Some resisted in spirit, but the sheer magnitude of the galactic power made resistance pointless. What emerged instead was a grim acceptance. If service was inevitable, then they would use it. Some saw opportunity, others sought glory, and some simply wanted to protect their people from what refusal might bring. When the first ships arrived to ferry recruits into orbit, alien commanders studied them like livestock at auction. Their bodies seemed unremarkable, their physiology plain compared to species bred for war. No claws, no scales, no natural armor, no extraordinary musculature. Just fragile skin and a tendency to wear expressions that shifted too quickly to be read. Reports marked them as average in every category. The Empire's generals, glancing over the assessments, muttered the same conclusion: useful enough to fill ranks, expendable when necessary. Training began under strict imperial doctrine, a rigid system built to standardize soldiers from countless species. Orders were expected to be obeyed without hesitation, every maneuver drilled until instinct replaced thought. To the instructors, obedience was survival. To the humans, the rules felt like shackles. From the first week, they questioned procedures. Why march in this formation when terrain offered better cover elsewhere? Why use one weapon setting when another could increase efficiency? The alien officers grew impatient, mistaking curiosity for insubordination. What they could not understand was that humans had never thrived by rigid obedience. Their strength had always been in asking, why, and refusing to accept limits. Frustration grew when the recruits began bending regulations. Maintenance crews, given outdated tools, scavenged and improvised until equipment performed beyond expectations. Infantry drilled with weapons not designed for their hands but soon modified grips and balances until they handled them better than their instructors. Even punishment failed to produce conformity. Laughter and sarcasm bled into the barracks, a refusal to break under discipline that should have cowed them. To the Empire, it was chaos. To the humans, it was survival instinct manifesting in its purest form. Simulations revealed more. War games designed to test recruits under controlled conditions consistently produced irregular results whenever humans participated. In scenarios meant to trap them, they found exits nobody else considered. When ordered to defend hopeless positions, they shifted tactics without approval, turning defeat into costly stalemates. Commanders dismissed these outcomes as anomalies or accidents, but the patterns repeated. Each failure to conform revealed instead a hidden strength, an ability to adapt faster than the system itself. Other species in training camps noticed as well. Some were unsettled by the reckless determination of their human counterparts. They saw recruits taking bruises and sparring without complaint, rising again and again until exhaustion forced a draw. They saw them share rations when shortages struck, an instinct to preserve the group rather than only the self. Even humor, alien and often incomprehensible, became a weapon against despair. To watch humans laugh in the face of harsh instructors or punishing drills was to realize they possessed a resilience that numbers could not measure. The veteran who had once spoken to the council remained a distant observer. Though his warnings had been ignored, he recognized in the raw edges of human behavior the very qualities he had tried to describe. Improvisation, stubbornness, irreverence, traits the Empire condemned as flaws were the same traits that had carved his nightmares. He watched as the recruits stumbled, adapted, and rose again stronger than before, and with each day the weight in his chest grew heavier. He knew what the council could not yet see: this was not disorder. It was evolution unfolding in real time. When final evaluations came, the reports reflected official disappointment. The humans had failed to meet expected discipline standards. Their formations were sloppy, their adherence to protocol inconsistent, their refusal to conform glaring. And yet, buried beneath dismissive words, casualty predictions in simulated combat ran lower than projections. Analysts flagged unusual adaptability but dismissed its significance. The Empire's leadership brushed the numbers aside. To them, humans were unruly, inefficient, incapable of fitting cleanly into the machine of imperial warfare. What they had overlooked was that the machine itself had never been humanity's path to survival. Where other species thrived under structure, humans thrived in the cracks between structure, making order serve them instead of the other way around. The Council, in its arrogance, saw failure where truth was trying to make itself known. They had demanded obedience and received innovation. They had asked for silence and been given defiance. They had wanted expendable soldiers, but what they had forged instead were survivors learning how to sharpen themselves against the whetstone of imperial war. For now, the Empire congratulated itself on securing a new supply of soldiers. For now, they still laughed at the warnings of the past. But the humans were already changing, already learning, and in that transformation lay the seeds of something the Empire would one day wish it had never planted. Deployment orders arrived without ceremony. The humans were to be dispatched to a volatile frontier where insurgents had resisted imperial control for years. Officially, the assignment was considered routine, a proving ground for new conscripts. In truth, it was a death sentence. The Empire had no intention of wasting its elite legions on what it viewed as a minor rebellion. Humans were convenient, disposable, and plentiful. To commanders, the mission was simple: throw them at the fire until the flames burned out. When the transports descended, local insurgents struck swiftly. The first hours were chaos as ambushes tore through units drilled to fight by rigid pattern. Alien cohorts broke formation under sudden pressure, retreating in disarray while communications faltered. By every calculation, the human detachments should have been the first to collapse. Instead, reports began filtering in that contradicted expectation. Rather than scatter, the humans dug into cover, trading ground for survival, responding not with panic but with improvised defense. Observers watched them turn landscapes into weapons. Where supply lines faltered, they raided enemy caches, feeding themselves with captured stock. When ammunition dwindled, they scavenged from wreckage, fashioning weapons out of what should have been useless debris. In ruined villages, they set traps with precision that seemed instinctive, luring insurgents into alleys where firepower was concentrated. Small squads maneuvered independently, linking together without orders to encircle threats. What should have been isolated defeats became coordinated strikes. Imperial officers dismissed early reports as exaggeration, but casualty tallies told another story. Insurgent numbers dropped at an alarming rate, far exceeding projections. One after-action summary described human units holding positions long after they should have been overrun. Wounded soldiers fought from the ground rather than retreat, some dragging themselves with shattered limbs just to stay in the fight. To their commanders, such acts bordered on insanity. To the insurgents, it was something worse: terror. Whispers spread through enemy ranks that these new fighters did not fear death, that they rose from wounds no one should survive. It was not simply endurance. In every engagement, the humans adapted faster than the conflict evolved. Standard tactics that worked against Imperial-trained forces failed against them. When insurgents used energy-based artillery, humans shifted to smoke and cover that nullified targeting systems. When ambushers tried coordinated strikes, humans countered with unpredictability, dispersing then converging with timing no algorithm could anticipate. They fought with an intelligence rooted not in doctrine but in instinct sharpened by desperation. Captured insurgents spoke of nightmares. They described opponents who laughed in battle, who charged through fire with reckless confidence, who fought not as soldiers but as predators. Some claimed the humans seemed to enjoy the chaos, feeding on it. The psychological effect rippled outward, undermining enemy morale in ways the Empire had never achieved through overwhelming firepower alone. Within Imperial command posts, unease replaced mockery. Analysts reviewing combat footage saw what their numbers confirmed. Humans did not merely survive, they excelled. Their casualty rates were high, but so were their kill counts, often exceeding ratios even elite legions struggled to match. Commanders searched for explanations but found none within the models they trusted. Humans were breaking the system itself, proving that obedience and precision were not the only paths to victory. The veteran who once warned the Council received fragments of these reports. Though vindication brought no satisfaction, he recognized the shape of his old memories. The stubborn resilience, the improvisation under pressure, the refusal to yield, these were the same qualities that had scarred him decades earlier. Watching the Empire dismiss results as coincidence made his words feel heavier than ever. He understood what they still refused to see: every battle was sharpening humanity's edge, and every victory taught them lessons that no doctrine could erase. By the campaign's midpoint, rebel strongholds that had endured for years fell within weeks of human involvement. Imperial propaganda praised the triumph as a testament to their own might, carefully omitting who had borne the brunt of the fighting. To the humans, the truth was obvious. They had been sent as expendables, yet they returned as victors, bloodied but unbroken. Whispers spread among Imperial ranks. Some aliens spoke with awe, others with dread. Stories circulated of squads holding against overwhelming forces until reinforcements arrived, of soldiers fighting on with wounds that should have ended them, of victories earned through sheer defiance. The humans themselves spoke little, but their silence carried weight. They had not fought to earn the Empire's respect. They had fought because survival demanded it. When the campaign concluded, the Empire credited itself with restoring order. But beneath the surface, unease lingered. What had begun as a disposable experiment had revealed something the Council had been too blind to accept. The humans had been tested in fire and had come out harder, sharper, and more dangerous than before. And though the Empire still congratulated itself, the first ripples of fear had begun spreading quietly across the stars. War spread across the frontier like a fire starved too long for fuel. Insurgencies multiplied, alliances fractured, and the Empire, accustomed to quick suppression, found itself stretched thin. Every campaign demanded more soldiers, and humans were deployed with increasing frequency. At first, commanders justified their presence as practical. They had proven themselves useful. But beneath official reports, a new sentiment was spreading: unease. The more they were used, the more their reputation grew, not only among enemies but among those forced to fight alongside them. Alien cohorts assigned to human units whispered of discomfort. They complained that humans fought as though war was not duty but instinct, that their decisions could not be predicted or controlled. Some feared them more than the enemy, unnerved by the reckless courage displayed in every skirmish. It was one thing to fight beside disciplined soldiers who obeyed orders to the letter. It was another to stand next to humans who turned disobedience into strategy, who acted on impulse and somehow bent chaos into victory. Stories spread quickly through the ranks. Tales of a single human squad holding an outpost long after supplies had run out, surviving on whatever could be scavenged, refusing surrender even as hunger and exhaustion gnawed at them. Rumors of men and women fighting with weapons that had ceased functioning, turning shards of metal into blades, or wielding captured enemy arms with savage proficiency. What began as scattered anecdotes hardened into a pattern. Everywhere they were sent, the outcome was the same: battles shifted, lines stabilized, enemies broken. Imperial commanders, blinded by tradition, dismissed it as coincidence. They praised outcomes without acknowledging the source. But those on the ground could not ignore the truth. They had seen how humans adapted in ways no manual accounted for, how their morale seemed unshakable even when odds should have crushed them. Where other species faltered under exhaustion or despair, humans dug deeper, driven by something beyond duty, a refusal to be defeated. Among the rebels, fear grew to legend. Surrendering prisoners muttered about the Terrans, as if they were phantoms conjured to punish resistance. Some swore they had seen them rise after being struck down, crawling back into the fight with eyes that promised vengeance. Others spoke of laughter in the midst of slaughter, unnerving and relentless. The psychological toll spread faster than the casualties. To fight the Empire was familiar. To face humans was something else entirely. The veteran who had once begged the Council to listen spoke again, though his words met the same wall of arrogance. He warned that what the Empire mistook for recklessness was a weapon sharper than any blade. He told them that humans could not be contained within their rigid structures, that their strength was born of resistance to control. He pleaded with them to understand that every battle fought under the Empire's banner only taught humanity more about galactic war. They were not tools to be used. They were a force becoming something the Empire would not be able to restrain. His words were met with the same dismissive contempt, the same certainty that history would bend to imperial will. But history was already shifting. The larger the wars became, the clearer the truth emerged. In one engagement that should have ended in catastrophic loss, humans turned defeat into victory by rewriting the rules mid-battle. Enemy weapons were seized and repurposed within hours. Enemy strategies were mirrored back against them. Imperial officers, trained to follow established doctrines, stood frozen while humans tore those doctrines apart and stitched them into something new. The outcome stunned even the victors. A battle expected to drag for weeks concluded in days, the enemy routed, the cost heavy but far less than predicted. Afterward, Imperial leadership tried to interpret what had happened. Official records spoke of bravery, of effective use of combined forces, of the superiority of Imperial command. But in the barracks, soldiers knew the truth. It had been the humans who turned the tide. They had fought not as extensions of the Empire but as something separate, something untamed. That distinction lingered in every whispered account, unsettling those who thought too deeply about the future. The Council continued to celebrate victories as proof of its strength, yet unease crept into the highest chambers. Quiet discussions questioned whether humans were truly loyal or merely useful. Punishments were issued for acts of disobedience, but the cycle repeated. The more restrictions placed on them, the more they bent rules to succeed. Every measure to contain them only revealed further their refusal to break. Across the frontier, rebels who once swore never to submit now chose surrender the moment they realized humans were present. Fear outweighed defiance. To them, imperial banners mattered less than the soldiers who carried them. And increasingly it was not the Empire they feared, it was Earth. The pattern was undeniable to anyone who looked honestly. The Empire had taken a species it believed ordinary and thrust it into the crucible of war. Instead of breaking, they hardened. Instead of obeying, they adapted. What had been intended as expendable fodder was becoming the most dangerous edge of the blade. And though the Empire still told itself it was in control, beneath the surface lay a truth it dared not speak. Humanity was no longer simply fighting wars. Humanity was learning how to master them. Victories accumulated, but so did questions the Empire could no longer ignore. Reports flowed in from every frontier, each carrying the same unnerving thread. Humans were not merely performing well, they were redefining the battlefield itself. Commanders complained they were impossible to direct, that they acted on initiative when discipline was demanded, yet results spoke louder than reprimands. Units that should have been shattered emerged scarred but victorious. Enemies surrendered at the first sight of them. Entire campaigns collapsed sooner than expected, not because of superior strategy from the high command, but because humans refused to lose. The Council attempted control through stricter decrees. Penalties were increased, orders emphasized, oversight intensified. It changed nothing. Humans bent restrictions into opportunities, turning punishment into fuel. Stripped of supplies, they scavenged. Denied support, they operated independently. For every attempt to enforce obedience, a new demonstration of defiance returned sharper than before. It was not insubordination, it was evolution. Each order ignored had purpose, each deviation produced results. The very discipline that the Empire believed held its legions together was the same chain humans were breaking, proving that survival favored those who refused to bow. Among allies, admiration grew reluctantly. Soldiers from other species, once resentful, found themselves grateful when humans stood beside them. They had seen firsthand how Terrans fought to drag comrades from fire, how they would not abandon positions others considered lost. To march with them was to march with something unyielding, and whispers began to spread that safety was found not under the banner of the Empire but within the ranks of humanity. The enemy understood faster. Insurgent leaders who had resisted the Empire for generations began offering unconditional surrender when humans appeared on the horizon. Some sought to bargain not with the Council but with human officers directly, believing negotiations would be more merciful. Fear of the Empire had always been political. Fear of humanity was visceral. They were no longer seen as soldiers of a galactic power but as a distinct force, one that carried its own reputation across the stars. In the council chambers, the veterans spoke for the last time. His body was weaker now, voice slower, but his words retained their weight. He told them their arrogance had blinded them, that they had created something they could no longer control. He described humanity not as subjects but as a storm gathering momentum, destined to sweep aside those who stood in its path. He warned that wars had only honed their instincts, teaching them lessons no other species had dared to learn. They had been underestimated, dismissed, and used, and now they were becoming a power the Empire could not contain. His speech ended without applause, without acknowledgement, but his expression was calm. He no longer needed their belief. The galaxy itself was beginning to see. By then, even Imperial intelligence could not ignore the shift. Surveillance showed humans establishing their own networks, sharing tactics across units, communicating outside official channels. They were not content to follow, they were building. Quietly, steadily, they were shaping themselves into something more than auxiliaries. What had started as scattered defiance was becoming cohesion. They were uniting under their own identity, one forged not by the Empire but against it. The realization came too late. Attempts to suppress them only backfired, fueling their determination. Punitive measures bred solidarity. Executions of so-called deserters sparked quiet mutiny, not open rebellion but a colder resolve. The Empire had sought obedient soldiers and had instead cultivated warriors who could not be broken, only unleashed. Beyond battlefields, fear became prophecy. Traitors, mercenaries, and refugees carried stories across the void. They spoke of humans who endured hunger and fire, who adapted to alien worlds with unnatural speed, who stared into hopeless odds and carved victory from the impossible. The stories grew, spreading faster than the Empire could suppress, and in every telling humanity became larger, darker, more inevitable. What terrified the Council most was not simply their strength, but their ambition. Already, questions arose among Terran ranks about why they should fight for an empire that treated them as expendable. Already, alliances were forming quietly, whispers of a future where they no longer served but commanded. The Empire had believed it was forging tools. In truth, it had armed rivals. The veteran's final words echoed long after he was gone. They are not soldiers as you understand them. They are survivors, predators, dreamers, and destroyers all at once. You sought to use them, and now you will have to endure them. The chamber had rejected his warning, but time would prove it true. Humanity was no longer the servant of empire. It was becoming the master of its own destiny, and the stars themselves would soon learn to fear the march of Earth.